Hello and welcome to Tarot Sherpa. I'm Christine with a review of tarot decks for tarot practitioners and tarot enthusiasts to be able to visually explore a deck before expending their pinnacles on something new. Although today's deck, in my opinion, should be in the collection of every tarot practitioner. So what we'll talk about today are the general characteristics of the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck. We'll talk about the overall mood and feeling of the deck. We'll talk about some roses and thorns about using this deck in a reading, and we'll also give some biographical information on the artists and authors who created this deck and their intentions behind it. Additionally, for this deck, we will talk about some really great books for those of you who are learning to read tarot. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck is the classic version in most tarot books, and we will talk about a couple of really good ones that can help you along your journey. So, let's begin. So briefly, I'm going to talk about a few books that I believe will help you along your tarot journey. First off is the little white book that you get with your deck. It was written by Arthur Edward Waite. He also wrote a longer pictorial key to the tarot. Honestly, you get just as much information out of this little white book as you get out of pictorial key. His larger work is a defense of why he undertook a new tarot deck at the beginning of the 20th century, and it also is a bit of a defense on why he's a little obscure with some of his definitions. As he was part of a secret society, he felt compelled to keep a few things secret. This is obviously a piece of paper. This book is available paperback, and it's available on Kindle. Obviously, I bought the Kindle edition. Another book also available paperback and Kindle was Katz and Tali Goodwin's Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot. Now, this is a really fun book on the history of the Waite-Smith Tarot and the history of Pamela Colman Smith and a little bit on A.E. Waite himself. All of this information that they researched from the British Museum. It's really, really fascinating. Highly recommend it. As a reference book, I also recommend Rachel Pollack's 78 Degrees of Wisdom. Obviously, this is a very well-loved copy of mine. I've had it for a number of years. I highly recommend it. It also goes into an elementary level of Kabbalistic nature of tarot. Kabbalism is a very, very detailed subject, and she does a really nice job of creating an introduction to that. And finally, a book I believe should be on every tarot practitioner's shelf is Holistic Tarot by Benebel. This is an exhaustive treatise. It's almost 900 pages long. In the back, in one appendix, she's got about 35 spreads that she's created or has adapted. Her Cyclopedia of Card Meanings is about 200 pages long, and she gives you keywords, she gives you astrological and planetary significances, and it also refers to the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. Another important thing she includes in here is legal considerations if you're intending to go into practice reading for other people for money. Those laws vary state to state, and she has a little bit of information on that. Benebel is a bar-certified lawyer in the state of New York, and if she didn't already have a Juris Doctorate, she could get a PhD for writing this book. This is a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. Okay, so now we will go through the deck, card by card, and we'll begin with the major arcana. This deck was initially commissioned in 1909 by A.E. Waite, who was a member of the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a secret society, which had actually had some factional splits, but many of the followers had stuck with A.E. Waite, one of which was Pamela Colman Smith, who was a rather well-known artist in Great Britain at the time. A.E. Waite had a lot of input into the structure of the major arcana. In fact, his guide, Pictorial Key to the Tarot, I think spends more time describing how he feels that the major arcana should look than even talking about card definitions. I actually did not include that in my recommended reading list because the actual card descriptions are not any more descriptive than you're going to get from the little white book. He was purposely secretive because it was a secret society and there were things that he felt honor compelled to keep to himself. and there are the major arcana. We'll go on to the suit of wands. So Waite commissioned these in 1909, and Pamela Colman Smith began in the spring of 1909. I have some sources that say April, some sources say June, but she completed them all by November of 1909, which was really quite extraordinary to produce 78 illustrations in probably about 6 months' time. The extraordinary thing about this deck is that Pamela Colman Smith completely illustrated all of these pip cards, meaning the earlier decks that were used by guys like Eliphas Levi and Pappas were not illustrated in the pip cards, just the court cards and the major arcana. So that created a tarot revolution happening as we move here onto the suit of cups in the early 20th century. And that's what made this deck so foundational for every other deck that's been produced since. Fully illustrated pip cards. Now, A.E. Waite had left a great deal of information on the major arcana, but these minor arcana cards were largely left up to the imagination of Pamela Colman Smith. So Pamela Colman Smith had a great deal of artistic freedom to create these with, and she used a lot of theatrical references because her background was mostly in theater as well as illustration. And so she was able to use a lot of Shakespearean references in her work. We're going to move on to swords now. So spiritualism in the beginning of the 20th century was at a very interesting time, in that this was the Victorian period where mediums, spiritualists, and other people seeking alternatives to established religion came to the forefront. And it became a lot more acceptable. I wouldn't say that it was completely acceptable to be outside of the normal religious milieu. But people were seeking, I mean, as they are now, alternatives to the establishment. And so you had a lot of people exploring things like tarot and other spiritual mediums to find those answers. All right, and lastly, we'll look at the suit of pentacles. Back in the early days, many of these secret societies required their initiates to create their own tarot decks, which, if you consider trying to make a deck of 78 cards a task, it seems like a really Herculean task. So any artist that decides to tackle a tarot deck certainly has my admiration. I can only imagine the difficulty one would have in trying to create something stylistically consistent across such a vast series of illustrations. But Pamela Colman Smith did that in under 6 months. And there you have it, the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot deck. So there's one more fun little story I wanted to include about the Waite-Smith Tarot, and that's the story of Snuffles the cat. So this story comes from Secrets of the Waite-Smith Tarot by Katz and Goodwin. And the story goes that the actress who had posed for Pamela Colman Smith to be as the Queen of Wands owned a little black cat by the name of Snuffles. And it's unclear whether Pamela Colman Smith painted him later as a spontaneous gesture, or if Snuffles perhaps just wandered into the sitting and made himself present. Pamela Colman Smith saw fit to include this little black cat, and not only influenced her own tarot deck, but many, many subsequent tarot decks have included either a black cat or an image of a cat somewhere in the Queen of Wands, and it all goes back to little Snuffles. So the Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot was the foundation of tarot in the 20th century, and this deck can be used for any kind of reading, whether if you're looking for love or business, purpose, personal growth. if you're looking to examine options and possible courses of action, you can use this tarot deck for any kind of reading. So thank you very much for joining me today. I enjoyed spending this time with you. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. Let me know what you are looking for in tarot reviews. Thank you.